Good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. Let me just make a few adjustments. Hold on, guys. I'm having a little trouble with the audio tonight. Let me turn off the playlist. There we go. Sorry about that. There we go. Hey, um, again, I'm getting a little echo here. Let me turn off the monitoring. There we go. I have video monitoring and I like to check my mics. I've had a little trouble with them lately. Welcome to Zion's Banner. I don't know how the high speed will go. I never do. I am thrilled folks are with me. If you're wondering about the outfit here, I love hoodies. I just absolutely love hoodies from my days in Illinois. And so this is the season in Arizona where I get to put on a turtleneck and a hoodie. In fact, when I go speak in different locations, I will often see if I can get a sweater or a hoodie from that place to remember the location by. So do not be surprised if I remember in your neighborhood and you see me speaking at a place that I don't try to go somewhere and get a hoodie. I will resort to t-shirts now that I'm in Arizona. So I am in my hoodie outfit. It almost looks a little Jedi-like, kind of, if I had it the right way. And so I am very comfortable. This is like beautiful, comfortable Arizona weather. And so I'm enjoying this. So this is kind of the Jeff Cran at home in his library reading and study look. So you're getting a look at that. We're going to be in Matthew 7. We're continuing our trip through Matthew and looking at things there. We're going to be right at the beginning of the new chapter dealing with the first pericope of chapter 7. If nothing else, you've learned a highly important theological word, the word pericope. And so you can impress your friends, other people you deal with, by talking about biblical pericopes. I kind of also like the white beard. It gives me kind of the Ben Kenobi look. And this is where we're at. And so we're going to be dealing with a topic that is rather important. I'm going to bring that up here and look at this. But before we do, I want to do another quick advertisement for the upcoming conference because some of you are also Vocab Malone fans and Irwin Williams fans. And so this is an exciting time when we in the Valley can get apologists together. And you know what you could say to Vocab Jeff is promoting the conference. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. And then I'm going to promo something else that's just a little bit closer to home. This is about 3 minutes here. But hey, Vocab put this together. Can't you tell that Vocab had a hand in putting this together? It is so urban, kind of in the hood sort of thing.
But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine. With sound doctrine.
Okay. I am already exciting because I will get to meet Nate face to face. This is exciting. So some of the community will actually be here. And I'll have the chance to go ahead and meet with you personally. and I'm so excited about that. Um, Hey, just a shout out to Corinth. I have actually looked at the video, started looking at the video from Nehemiah Gordon, and I think we will do an upcoming show just on Hebrew grammar in that section and what we can say and what we can't say, with kudos to Nehemiah Gordon, but some adjustments that I think are good for us to keep in mind. So thank you for turning me on to that. If you're watching and you don't know who Corinth is, just look in the chat line and be assured that I take seriously videos that are suggested and topics that are suggested, because I want this to be practical and useful and valuable, and I am also a learner, so I really like that. Um, so that is there. So there is the vocab kind of hoodie, like in the hood, and then there's the Jeff Cran kind of hoodie. Little humor there. Real quick, if you are in the neighborhood and you like chili, just be assured that there's a chili bake-off here at the church. I'm not going to contribute because nobody can beat uh, Rabbi Brian's chili. But I like chili. I don't like hamburger, but I really like chili. So that's just our little bit of advertising stuff. We'll call it the shameless commerce division, even though it's not commerce. And if you're in the neighborhood here in Phoenix and you want some chili, there's the big chili bake-off, and the money goes to help the kids. And I'm always interested in kind of helping the next generation. So uh, that's where we're at. Let's get busy with tonight. We've kind of done some advertising. Now I think it's time to do some delving. So I need delving music someday, so we could have some delving music get in there. Um, Originally, this said Rabbi Jeff Cran. It's Reverend Jeff Cran. The reason was, originally I gave this at a Messianic congregation, and they gave me the honorary title Rabbi, and that's the way they understood it. And I was like, oh, well, that sounds cool. My unsaved Jewish parents would like me called Rabbi a lot more than minister, so I'll just go ahead and take it. Separating judgment from discernment. What does Jesus say about judgment? Now, let's get in here a little bit. Let's just understand the times that we're dealing with here. Do you think that Judaism probably in that day and age, and the Pharisees in particular, had a judgment problem? Yes, because legalism always leads to judgment. And so Jesus is going to discuss judgment and ethics and the image of God as it relates to this particular crew. So I called it to judge or not to judge when I did it at the congregation. Are we taught not to judge? What is Jesus really saying here? Let's go ahead and deal with it. Um, it's also a problem in our day. Now, understand something very important that was unique, that you may not know, is that the Pharisees themselves had a contempt for the common person who was outside the rabbinical schools of the Pharisees. They would refer to them as the people of the land. And so that was kind of a kind of chop at them, kind of a looking at them negative. It was like, those are just the common folks. They're not in the rabbinical academies and schools. They're just the laymen. They're just the common day workers, but they aren't delving into Torah like we are. They aren't sitting at the feet of some great rabbi like we are. And they weren't formally a part of anything. James Utley, in his comments on the Gospel of John and John's writings, Volume 4, the study guide has this quote in here: but this crowd does not know the law is accursed. This refers to the people of the land. The term is Am Haaretz, who were looked down upon by the religious leaders because they didn't perform all of the oral traditions. So it isn't just it wasn't like everybody back then didn't care about God. It was you're starting to get the formation of Talmud and oral law. And so, of course, these guys spent all their time in the rabbinical schools, quote unquote, kind of like the philosophers on Mars Hill. They were the sophisticated ones. They were the ones that were learning not only some of the Torah being taught every week and their own personal, ability to pick up the Word of God, but they were not being taught what the rabbi said about the Word of God. Kind of like the lay Catholic versus the Catholic priest, sort of, in a weak sort of way. And so they tended to look down upon them. So judgmentalism, particularly among the Pharisees, towards the Am Haaretz was a real problem. Not to mention what the different sects of Judaism thought about each other. And so that was a real issue. And so Jesus is going to discuss judgment because there's a social situation that he's dealing with. Now, this is all applicable to us, but I want to give you the original background and why Jesus is picking these subjects. These were hot topics at the time. And so Jesus is hitting on them and then teaching us ethics and the way God looks at things. We'll say God's perspective through dealing with these topics at the time. So let's begin with what we've got going here. If you pick up Matthew 7, the first pericope, 7 verses 1 through 6, is the pericope we're going to be focusing on. And it begins with an imperative, judge not. And that indeed is an imperative in the Greek. Now, I stuck the Greek up there, okay, because there are different ways to express an imperative. This is a second person verb with the negative. Actually, you know that stuff in the thing, the word there at the end of the second word that looks like ETE. It's actually epsilon tau epsilon, but it's a lot like our ETE. That's a second person, and then the first two. I know that looks like an N, but that actually has an A sound to it. And may, and then you have the word second person, so you have a negation. Al is used like may in Hebrew. Now, I was having some conversations with a brother who's actually a fellow apologist that really believes, and there is some evidence, that there was an early copy of Matthew in Hebrew fairly early on. And so I think just the nature of Matthew and it being so incredibly Jewish that there are a lot of Hebrewisms that are translated over into the Greek, even more so than all of the New Testament, because the New Testament contains a lot of those. The book of Hebrews does, but I think Matthew has a lot of this in there. And so just to help you, al, which is shown there, is used like the word may in Greek. So if I want to do al, I would often do may when I translated it, which is what the Septuagint would do, to express or to have a conditional negation. Now, what do I mean by conditional negation? This will be interesting for you folks. The 10 Commandments are lo, not may. So there are two ways to negate something in Hebrew. There's al, not el. El is like Elohim. This is al. And then there is also another way, which is lo. Okay, and lo simply means no. And then there's actually a third way, which means like none, without number. Ein suf, without number. And they're all a little different. The two main ways to negate are al and lo. Ein is not quite as much used. Now, I want to say don't do something for a time in Hebrew. I want to indicate a negative command that is not necessarily permanent, like don't touch the stove. If I said don't touch the stove to my kids, I don't mean that at 23 they can't touch the stove. I mean that while they're children, they can't touch the stove because they don't really understand what it's going to do. And this is a temporary command so that my 25-year-old son is not calling me and asking dad's permission to use the stove. And that's done with al. I'm sorry, with l, or al, not l. Okay? But when you want to say something is like no, don't ever, or thou shall not, you use lo with what's called the imperfect second person. Now, all of your 10 commandments are lo with the imperfect second person. In other words, God was saying, thou shalt not, and that's not going to change anytime soon. May, use this way, introduces a warning or a negative prohibition, but it's conditioned. Now, this isn't conditioned in the amount of time, like don't judge, uh, but it's conditioned in the sense of situationally. Because Jesus is talking about a particular phenomena here, and I don't think Jesus is we're going to get into judgment and discernment, okay? But it's judge not, and it refers to other people, that you be not judged, or that you are not judged. So this commands a prohibition, but not an unconditional prohibition that forbids the upholding of moral standards, as we'll see. A lot of times, and we're going to see this, people will say, you can't judge me. You're a Christian. Yes, I may be murdering people and sleeping around while I'm married, but you can't judge me. You're a Christian. Christians can't judge. Well, using a prohibition like this, that's not unconditional, is just one more facet of Jesus not indicating that moral discernment or moral standards, I should say that moral standards, he's indicating moral standards can be upheld. In other words, he's using a form that allows for the upholding of moral standards. We're going to talk more about that later. But I just want you to let you know that even the form of the language there is designed to address this topic, but not to remove the upholding of moral standards. And so that's just kind of a little bit of background there. Now, why shouldn't I judge other people? I mean, sometimes it makes people feel really good, right? When I'm out witnessing, people will always say, well, I'm not as bad as so-and-so, or I've never done anything bad. Well, you never done anything bad? Well, I've never done anything like murder anybody. Um, by the way, if I was talking to somebody and I was witness to him and they told me, yeah, I've like killed 6 people and their bodies are buried in my backyard, and why don't we go into this alley and we could talk about it? I'd be like maybe a little nervous. Okay, Jesus gives the reason that you're not to judge. So it's not a command that doesn't have a reason behind it. And the Greek does a cool thing. It uses a Greek word, hina, to indicate the purpose or reason behind something. And that's the word that you have translated as that in most of your translations. And so I don't have the Greek sitting in front of me, but hina, that you be not judged. And so there's actually Jesus tying the reason that you aren't judged with the negative conditioned prohibition, judge not. And so that's what's kind of going on there. That's the linguistics of it. See, what God does is God's equitable. We've talked about justice and equity a whole lot. Okay, all of God's commands go back to God's character. God is equitable. So an equitable God, okay, is going to use the same standard. So if you apply a standard to someone, God then has the freedom, right, and it is totally consistent with his character. In fact, it would be inconsistent with his character not to apply that measure back to you. So God will use the scale you set to examine you. So do you want to raise that bar real high? Well, then you're raising the bar real high against yourself. And so Jesus is basically saying, look, there's a very practical reason for not being too quick and nasty with your judgments, because the very criteria that you are using is the very criteria that God is totally free and it is totally consistent with his character to use. So you're really working yourself into a hole morally. And by the way, we often react most strongly to things we see in other people that we ourselves do. And Jesus is going to kind of discuss that too. We project. And so Jesus is saying, look, there's a practical reason here. The Pharisees run around making these pronouncements and judgments very quickly in a vacuum, looking down on the common people. But what they don't realize is while they're doing that, God is applying the same standards to them. And if we go to Romans 2, we see Paul doing much the same thing. Speaking to the religious person, particularly the Jew, he says, do you tell men not to commit idolatry and loot temples, but you yourself do these things? And what he's really saying is, look, um, you don't stand free in the divine court either. Um, if the accusations that a Rabbi Singer makes against Christians were applied back to him, he may not stand as well as he thinks he does. So, but that's for another day. Um, at the end, I'll have a few words to say about where we're going and what we're doing, because I like to keep you guys attached. Okay? Now, I put something up. If you, this is a diagram that I didn't even think about you guys wanting, but you may very well want it. And so what I think I will do is I will diagram this out, and then I've made the diagrams available to some folks. If you want the diagrams from the diagram folder, I'm not making it hard. Email me. Okay? zionsbanner@gmail.com. I've done that so I don't mix my personal mail up. So I know that that's a request for access to the diagrams. Just makes it easier for me to tell. I won't confuse it with mail from the office or other stuff or mail from Hillside Southern Baptist. I want to give you guys, give folks a priority there and have a priority way to get a hold of me. That's a good way to do it. I will answer other emails, you know. But I want you to have these sorts of diagrams because these diagrams are so absolutely cool to me. We trace God's command back to God's character. By the way, that's a way we're different from Islam. God commands things based on who he is. Okay? They aren't arbitrary commands. See, Allah, something is good because Allah commands it. We say God commands out of his goodness. So it isn't good just because he commands it, but he doesn't command it just because it's good. He commands it because it's consistent with himself, which is the fount of all goodness. So here's judgmentalism at the bottom, okay? Now, what judgmentalism leads to is unequal measures. And we've talked about the sinfulness of unequal weights and measures when we've discussed Rabbi Singer. And I will keep bringing that up because as he's judging Christians for being what he calls false or disingenuous or ignorant, he's actually creating unequal measure. That goes back to equity. It violates the principle of equity. Well, what is the principle of equity grounded in? Well, it's grounded in the character of God. God is just, so equity is required, so unequal measures is disallowed, and so judgmentalism is wrong. And that's why God measures us partially with our own measure. He also measures us by his glory, but when we pronounce judgment on somebody, that becomes part of the measure he uses because his character is totally equitable. Okay? And there's the verse about unequal measures. You shall have a perfect and just weight, a perfect and just measure, that your days may be lengthened in the land which the Lord God is giving you. It is against Torah to have a double standard. And the Pharisees were having a double standard. As they were looking down on the people, they were ignoring the simple piety of the simple people. And so we move from attitude to action to principle and measure it against God's character. And if it doesn't measure up, then we have a problem. So, that's where we're at there. Actually, one of the verses I really like is Micah 6:8. He has shown thee, O man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, that you do justly, consistent with a proper moral standard and equitable, to love mercy, that's actually the word loving kindness or covenant loyalty, chesed, and that you walk humbly with your God. And so Jesus is pointing out one of the problems of his day. The Pharisees are not walking humbly with their God, and they're not doing justly, because invoking a standard against others, they too have that standard invoked against them. I just say hi. I see another person in the room. Um, I almost want to chime in. He's asking about Aramaic or Hebrew. Aramaic was the daily conversational language, kind of like Yiddish is for Eastern European Jews, but prayer and study was usually in Hebrew. You can weigh that in your decision, but I think it has some bearing, and so it's worth thinking about. And so, uh, but I'm not going to get super dogmatic, because even if it was Aramaic, I would not be surprised to see Hebrewisms. And Aramaic has a very similar grammar. They're related languages. The endings and prefixes are different, but there's a relationship. And so I just wanted to say hi, and I'm thrilled for the comment. And so it is good that Isaiah is in the house. Okay? From precept to divine attribute, righteousness. I had a great metaphysical theological conversation with my daughter. The great thing about investing in our kids and homeschooling is the conversations we can have now. And she pointed out the way you couldn't have love without justice, and you can't have, and justice stems from love, and love also is interconnected and stems from justice, and the two are related. They're not separated. It was a great conversation we were having, related to some books we might talk about in the future. So let's keep moving. Okay? Judgmentalism ultimately violates equity. Okay? So now he's going to talk about a matter of perspective here. And he's going to use something that they would understand. The beam and the speck. I almost want to kind of show you what that looks like in terms of doing this on the air. I may try it. I don't know how well things necessarily always work. But I'm really tempted to go ahead and give this a shot. But Jesus is going to talk about perspective, and he's going to talk about the other issue with judgmentalism, which is perspective. So in verses 2 through 5, do not look at the speck in your brother's eye. Why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye? Sorry, it's interrogative. But do not consider the plank in your own eye. Or how can you say to your brother, let me remove the speck from your eye and look? A plank is in your own eye. Hypocrite, first remove the plank from your own eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's. Now, it's a matter of perspective, and this doesn't work necessarily well on camera, but yeah, I love visuals. I'm a teacher, okay? If I go ahead, okay, and I do this, see, the pen looks like a speck to me, okay? But it's really kind of a plank. And I know this isn't perfect, okay? But if I'm looking at this and you're looking at me, see, I just see the tip here. I just see the speck in my eye, okay? But I don't see all that's there. And so as I'm looking at you like this here, I'm seeing the speck. It looks like a speck to me in my own eye. But when you're looking at me at this, you're seeing like the whole plank. See, so you've got the plank in my eye. I see it as a speck. You see it as a plank. If the situation's reversed, you can see how that works. And so Jesus is talking about this perspective. My wrongs are going to seem like a speck. They're going to seem like nothing. The same wrong in my brother is going to seem like a plank. Here, I want to help you, brother. Let me be brutally honest with you for a few minutes. Um, and so I want to help him out, but what I'm ignoring is this big thing that really looks like nothing to me that I need to deal with. Now, remember, he's talking about this in terms of the Pharisees because the way they viewed themselves is they were the instructors of babes. They were the teachers of the ignorant. They were the holy that taught holiness to the poor common people who did not know all the ins and outs of the rabbis and the sages. They were the wise one of Israel, instructing the ignorant and the dumb. And you see that sort of attitude. Um, and so that's their whole attitude. And by the way, listen when I do a singer thing and I show a clip. Do you hear that sort of thing? I mean, I'm going to ask you. You judge for yourselves. But that's what Jesus is referring to, and that was their sort of attitude that we are the upper crust, the elite. And I have to tell you, that's a danger. I'm looking forward to finishing my doctorate, but I have to beware because I could take on the era. Of course, you guys are so cool, and so I never want to do that. I don't want to do that with anyone on the street. Um, but Jesus saying, don't do that. Remember that even though you are getting this inside stuff and will be getting this teaching, this incredible teaching and stuff, uh, don't take upon this attitude of the Pharisees. And it's a warning to us. Okay, it's a real warning to us because as believers we can sort of like, how can these poor stupid unsaved people really do this? Okay. uh, and we have what they don't, and it's easier to look for that vantage point. So there's this matter of perspective. But wait a minute, don't I still have to evaluate moral issues? We talked about it last night. Yes, I do. Well, then how do I know and evaluate judgmentalism versus discernment? In the same passage in the next pericope, or actually at the bottom of this pericope, Jesus is going to call for discernment. And he's going to do it in a rather brash, not brash, I don't want to accuse our Lord of precious, in a strident sort of way. I'm looking for the right adjective. Okay, in a strong way, especially for a Jewish audience. Do not give what is holy to dogs, nor cast your pearl before swine, lest they trample you under feet, turn and tear you to pieces. Um, whoa, wait a minute now. What are we talking about here? I thought you just said don't judge. Well, wait a minute now. I'm not supposed to give what holy to dogs and cast my pearls before swine. I need to be discerning, don't I? So Jesus is telling them to practice discernment. This sounds terribly insulting. It's powerful imagery. You don't pull out the imagery of dogs and swine. By the way, you have to understand that the term dogs can refer to wild dogs, not just your little pet poodle. Okay? You don't take something of great value and throw it to creatures that won't appreciate it. Okay? We have a pet dog. She's not doing so well. She's getting older. Um, and so, I kind of feel, and so, but do I want to throw the filet mignon to the dog? Is she going to appreciate that? Probably not. You're not going to take what's holy and give it to the plain, the commonplace, the unkosher animal. Dogs aren't kosher, neither are pigs. Okay? You're not going to cast something as valuable as pearls before swine. Why? Because they won't treat them right. And then they'll turn on you. They won't appreciate what they're given, and so they won't appreciate the person who gives it to them. Now, how does this play? Well, Jesus is not calling for a lack of discernment. Treat holy things and precious things as holy and precious, and discern who you are dealing with. but do not be judgmental. So Jesus is not removing discernment. What he's dealing with is the arrogant judgmentalism of the Pharisees and teaching the people around, and his disciples particularly, and those that were in earshot, that the attitude of superiority and arrogance that was judgmentalism and legalism on the part of the Pharisees was not what God wanted. But that doesn't mean that God doesn't want us to differentiate between the precious and the sacred and those things of lesser sanctity, and misuse that which is holy by giving it to those who can't appreciate it. And we're going to talk a little more about this because I'm out on the streets. My goal is to make apologetics practical and to make practical talking to people good apologetics. Okay? We want to give what's holy and valuable to those who can appreciate them. We may remember that there's a time to speak and a time to be silent. God's truth must not be exposed unnecessarily to abuse and mockery. Did I say this? No. Richard T. Francis, in his commentary on Matthew, says this. And I think he's right. God's truth should not be unnecessarily abused and mockery. We don't want to treat God's word in a cavalier manner as we're giving it out without regard to our audience and what they can appreciate and can't. So there is a sense. Is it worth it to do the apologetics to expose things? Yes, for the audience. One person once said to me, apologetics doesn't convince the unconvincible. No, but it edifies the convinced and it equips them. And it makes those who have objections more willing to listen if there's any openness there. In other words, it opens the cracked door a little wider and it edifies the believer. And so it can take the undecided and be used by God to move them in a direction, because I do believe in pre-evangelism. It can take the opposed and soften the opposition if God's willing to use it. And it can go ahead and edify the believer in either case. This isn't that. But do I argue the point against somebody who is embittered? Let me tell you a funny story about that, because that might be my temptation as one who likes to defend truth. There's an atheist who really liked to bother us when we were doing First Fridays, and I was out with a yoke fellow, Melanie, and he was haranguing the Christians. I mean, he was being really insulting. And I engaged him once before and it didn't get anywhere. He has an anger management, God hatred problem. Okay. And so he was bitterly attacking us. And what we started doing was passing tracts to the other people. He would go ahead and say something about us, and I'd turn to the crowd with the tracts and I'd say, is this the voice of reason that you want to hear? And I started talking to the audience and not him, because to continue to fight with him would be casting pearls, giving valuable things to one who could not appreciate them because he doesn't want to appreciate them. And I turned and I talked to the crowd. And my temptation was to deal with him, but God checked me in my spirit and said, no, use his opposition for my glory. You talk to them. And you know what? I got into a great conversation with a guy. And so he became the draw, and God used him despite himself. And I kind of had a laugh. And at the end of the evening, we said goodnight to him and smiled. Because whether he knew it or not, he was used of God. But to fight with him at that moment was not the time. It was right to be silent to him but not be silent to the crowd around him. There's a right kind of judgment. We need to be discerning. I just read an article on why Generation Z is leaving the church. We need to have answers for people. And there's a right kind of judgment which the disciple is called upon. Again, Richard T. France actually addresses this in his commentary on Matthew because he thinks it's important. So how do I know the difference between discernment and judgment? I mean, that's where the real problem's going to be, right? I am learning to settle back and listen to what's going on. What's going on in me? Is it the Spirit of God leading me, or am I just getting really hot under the collar? I mean, do I feel my neck getting warm? What's going on? What am I? Is this the Spirit moving me, or is this Jeff Cran? And we have ways of knowing that. But beyond that, we have some things that will act as markers that will help us. Discernment is about actions and ideas. It's about nouns and verbs. Verbs are actions, okay? Noun is a person, place, or thing. Discernment is about ideas and actions. Judgment is about people, okay? You are doing is a discerning statement. You are always like is a judgmental statement. Because I'm focused on the person, I'm not focused on the action. I'm focused on the person and naming him and labeling him. I'm not focused on the idea. Discernment holds itself accountable. I could be wrong. I don't know this person's motivations. I don't know their hearts. We tend to assume a lot. Discernment is willing to change its mind if new facts are entered in. Discernment is willing to examine itself to see if its conclusions are just and right and good. But see, judgment isn't. Judgment avoids scrutiny. Discernment is about what's good. Judgment is about being right. And I come from a long line of people that like to be right. Okay? I like debate and I like winning. I'll be honest. I'm going to be very human tonight. But you know what? You can be good or you can be right. They aren't the same thing. I think a long time ago, although I have not necessarily lived it consistently, I told my kids it's more important to be good than it is to be right. Discernment comes alongside. How can I help? Judgment looks on from above. That's just him. He's always going to be like that. It's the type of person he is. It's really disgusting. Discernment says, this is something that can be corrected. So which do you find? It helps to focus on ideas and verbs. Someone was kind enough to leave. David Wood said something. He hates stupidity, but he doesn't attack the person. He attacks the idea when someone pushes him. And I thought that's very good. When someone pushes, attacking the idea is where we want to be. Having said that, you will hear some comments about Rabbi Singer because of equity. And so I will try to always place it as this is what Rabbi Singer is doing. But sometimes it gets hard to discern, especially when a person's made this a repeated pattern. So that's a warning to me in future broadcasts to be righteously bad over seeing people deceived, but righteously careful. Okay. Personal grace must be extended. Doctrinal correctness in doctrine. I like this. This is a takeoff of something that Bernard, I think it was Bernard of Clairvaux, said. I just know him because I think he started the Benedictine order. In doctrine correctness, in practice flexibility, in all charity. He didn't put it that way. I changed it because I thought the way he stated it could be misleading. We want to be correct in doctrine, but we also need to have charity and understand that we too are learning and growing in our understanding of doctrine and understanding the balances of doctrine. In practice flexibility, I like that because, and in charity, doctrine is what, practice is related to how doctrine is carried out. Love refers to the attitude by which we do things. Be good, not right. Intellectual bigotry. We can get proud. We can get overly systematic. I like the balance. I like finding the balance. The sum of thy word is truth. I like finding the doctrinal balances and the positions that fit the whole of the evidence of Scripture. Okay, I like finding the position that takes into account different parts of the word as it speaks to the same thing. And I'm always looking for that golden center, that balance. And that's part of what's fascinated me with a certain position that we will have an episode on that I'm liking more and more because it balances and harmonizes some things. Okay, and again, I look at my Bible as a love story, not a textbook. So for something to be true, all the parts of the story should fit it. So let me give you, and you've heard it from me over and over again, but I learned it when I was in the Messianic Studies program, and I've loved this line from Talmud. This to me is the best of Talmud. Yezechu chacham halamed halomed mikol adam. Who is wise? He who learns from all persons, or from every person, depending on your translation. Biblical truth and material from those outside our movement can be used. I can learn from the rabbis. Okay? I could learn from the church fathers. They aren't authoritative, but that doesn't mean that there isn't something there. And even with the rabbis, there is background that is very useful. And it informs me. What it isn't is authoritative. That's what I think is meant by sola scriptura. Any system we adopt that we start looking at the word through instead of looking at the system through the word becomes a problem. Biblical truth and material from those outside our movement can be respected. I quoted Michael Heisner there, and I really want to read this quote. I don't agree with everything Michael Heisner says, but he says some interesting and good things. Another reason to avoid being uncritically characterized by theological systems. We have been trained to think that the history of Christianity is the true context of the Bible. We talk a lot about interpreting the Bible in context, but Christian history is not the context of the biblical writers. The proper context for interpreting the Bible is not Augustine or any other church father. Very important. It is not the Catholic Church. It is not the rabbinical movements of late antiquity. That would refer to the rabbinical movements late Talmud, Middle Ages. Rabbinical Judaism is fully formed and in place, and the Middle Ages. It is not the Reformation or the Puritans. It is not the evangelicalism in any of its flavors. It is not the modern world at or any period of its history. The proper context for interpreting Scripture is the context of the biblical writers, the context that produced the Bible. Every other context is alien to the biblical writers and therefore to the Bible. Yet there's a pervasive tendency in the believing church to filter the Bible through creeds, confessions, denominational preferences. Creeds serve a useful purpose. They distill important, I bet carefully selected theological ideas, but they are not inspired. They are no substitute for the biblical text. The biblical text was produced by men who lived in the ancient Near East and Mediterranean between the second millennium and the first century. To understand how biblical writers thought, we need to tap into the intellectual output of that world. A vast amount of that material is available to us thanks to modern technology. Our understanding of the worldview of the biblical writers grows, and so does our understanding of what they intended to say. The mosaic of their thinking takes shape in our minds. Heisner. Let me just say this. I will be speaking at a Reformed conference. I don't like that term. Am I sympathetic to many of the ideas there? Yes. But the Reformers were not the context through which the Hebrew Scriptures were written. And they are not the context that should be imposed on either the New Testament or. If you're of that, I love you, brother or sister. I'm not against you. I'm actually sympathetic and would agree with you about a great many things. But I do say to be careful, because we can fall in love with our system to the point where we love our system more than we love the scriptures given to us by God. And it is a great danger. Let us be discerning, and let us be self-discerning, examining even the things we think of. Let's make the applications. I hope, if you disagree, go ahead, comment. I'm not offended. But I want to be careful because we're breaking Christianity into little tiny, not churches, but even to the point where we like sticking something in front of that. Third and fourth descriptors now. And I want to be real careful of that. Application, learn to discern. Engage. Not, I'm not talking about IQs. Think about your faith. Think about how you got there. The greatest thing you can do when discussing with someone a different point of view, particularly a believer, is to take them on the mental journey you took to get there. If nothing else, they'll understand you better. Discernment is not judgment. We are allowed to say, this is morally wrong. Sola Scriptura acknowledges no system above the scriptures. Whether it has 1,000,000 points or it has 5 points, it doesn't matter how many points it has. Sola Scriptura means that the Bible is the sole binding authority on believers. That doesn't mean we can't learn. What it does mean is we have to be careful about shifting our authority from one to another. And so we want to be terribly careful about that. And so there's a caution there. Do we discern? Yes. Do we not judge? Yes. We avoid the judgment of the person. There are times when their motives are pretty transparent, but we avoid that where we can, and we focus on the ideas and the actions, because actions can be changed, and new ideas can be accepted, and old ideas can be amended. Well, that takes us to this section on Matthew. Some of what's coming up. Website now has the top videos at www.zionsbanner.org. It has the blogs, so I also blog somewhat. You can come visit the website and see a blog or two that I just can't do on the air. The videos that are top you probably see, but that's up there. We're making changes. There's also a calendar where I'm speaking, and I try to keep that up to date. Who knows? Maybe I'll end up in your area. Wouldn't that be kind of neat? And then we could meet face to face like I'm going to get to do with some of you. If you support us with Chosen People, we love you and we're so grateful. If you are a Patreon supporter, you also help make this possible. So I'm going to put the background music on low. I'm going to be around for comments. There may be less because this was exegetical teaching. And just put that on real low in the background. We're going to try this as background music, like my friend would say. There we go. Hey, a special thanks to those who came into the room tonight. A shout out to Mark. And I saw another new visitor, Isaiah. Great names, Mark and Isaiah. I'm thrilled that you were here. Hopefully you can hear me. I'll turn this up a little. But I want to say thank you for coming and joining us tonight. I'm really glad that you visited. If you haven't hit the subscribe button, but I think someone did, please do that. And we will be getting together for the apologetics broadcast. We'll just take a look at how Jesus viewed government in general next week. And then we'll look at the secular Jesus. And then I've got material coming up from Dr. Singer and evaluating his positions. We're looking at does the death of the righteous atone? Rabbi Singer says no, it doesn't, and Jewish people never thought it did. And he also says that we are misunderstanding Isaiah 53. And so we will be looking at those things on Wednesdays in the future.